It's Armoured Clash week, and we have 3 amazing starter sets to be won. We'll pick 3 winners, one from the YouTube comments, one from the OnTableTop.com comments, and one from the Cult of Games members, so you guys get an extra chance to win.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm joined once again by Parker and James M to talk about Armoured Clash, and now that people have got their teeth into the battle for Singapore, what can they expect to see in the future? It's a big topic.
There's a lot.
I'm sure the answer is everything for everyone.
Let's talk about maybe like the roadmap that we've got. We can also talk about maybe a little bit about the things that are coming out alongside Battle for Singapore as well, because maybe you've picked up the introductory set and you've played through that. You want to kind of expand a bit. I mean, you get quite a lot of stuff in the Battle for Singapore. Yeah. You do get a really solid couple of armies, but of course, all of that is also being presented in different ways. So, for example, we've got the starter sets, both the Crown and the Empire. What do you get in those?
You get your landship, big, ridiculous resin thing, which just has a huge impact in the game. And you also get pretty much full armies. You can add to them if you want to and everything else, but you get a good amount of stuff. But also you're going to get a rulebook, you're going to get dice, you're going to get cards, you're going to get tokens and markers, all the lovely things, so you can just play the game. Yeah,
the only stuff that doubles up really is the tokens, the dice and the measuring tools, which are all things you want to have more of anyway.
Exactly.
So those are really nice ways to kind of bulk your force out, especially because the way the force building works, when you recruit a unit into your army, when you add it to your list, you're picking it at one of 3 levels. It's either basic, reinforced, or full strength. Conveniently, this ties in directly with the sprues. So say you've got a sprue of 6 Crown rifles. That's on one sprue, that's 1 unit, that's the basic level unit. Put a second sprue in, that's now 12, that's now a reinforced unit. Put a third, that's now 18, that's a full strength unit. And everything works like that. The only exception is things like landships, or any big behemoths which are individual big models.
Sure.
And they always count as full strength, basically.
Which is very handy, because then you're not having to play around going, well, I've got 7. Yeah. I can have 2 more, but they come 1 on a sprue or 1 in a box, and you're having to pick and choose.
Force building is really easy.
But we are also going to be getting battle group boxes. For people who have played Dystopian Wars, it will be very similar to the Battle Fleet boxes there, where you'll get your big resin piece and then just a couple of sprues that is just like your standard armoured unit, say, with some other bits on there. Just because people want different ways to expand. If you think, oh man, I really want another landship. So
there's a lot of like additional support for the Crown and the Empire, but nothing really new in terms of miniatures, just different ways of getting those.
Yeah.
So I don't know, are people interested in hearing about stuff beyond the Crown and Empire? Is that a thing people want to talk about at all?
Maybe. Probably not.
Well, this has been a great video. Like and subscribe.
We could at least tell them what's coming out.
We could, couldn't we?
Around Christmassy times.
So end of this year, winter 2024, I think is what the way we're putting it. It's nice and vague. Winter.
It is. I like winter because it goes all the way up to February, technically.
I think it's good to do things this way, because when you give really precise dates, you set yourselves unrealistic targets, I think, and then you end up rushing and compromising quality, or exactly. So we're much better off saying winter, end of this year. What's coming out first, Parker?
Union. For people who have played Dystopian Wars, they'll know the Union. And that's actually a really important thing to point out. If you've played Dystopian Wars and you love the 8 great powers we've got there, all of those great powers will be represented in Armoured Clash. But importantly for the Union, a lot of those units have been seen in not just Dystopian Wars, but Wild West Exodus. So being able to see some Armoured Federal Troopers now in 10mm, or Rolling Thunders now in 10mm is just... I mean, as a person who kind of came in loving Wild West Exodus, it's got me really excited. Not that I like the Union, the Boonian as I call them, but because we've got our personal favourites.
It's interesting. It's the first where we're really going to see the midway point that Armoured Clash is between Dystopian and Wild West Exodus, and see that sort of cross pollination. To a greater degree as well.
Because there are certain things where you'll see, so okay, here we go. So the Union is a great example. If you look in Dystopian Wars, I know there is at least one, I believe it's a landing token, I think, that has my brain's gone completely blank.
The Lakota
Heavy yeah, that's it. Big old land train, okay? So you've got that as a token in Dystopian Wars. In Wild West Exodus, well, it's maybe a little bit big for that, but I can imagine someone doing an amazing piece of terrain for that, right?
It has been released as this huge resin thing that covers most of the board.
But in Armoured Clash, it is the behemoth. It's the equivalent of the land ship for the Union. So you've got a 4-carriage land train with lovely little magnetized couplings, so it moves around things. Oh, it snakes around the battlefield,
little turrets and everything else.
Yeah, so that's going to be a really cool, like, unique thing for their faction. It looks really cool, and I think the Union slots in quite nicely between the Crown and the Empire, because the Crown are like a very heavy force. You look at their tanks. The Galahads are really big tanks, but you don't really feel that until the Union comes around. You really get the feel of, oh, the Galahads are really big and chunky.
Yeah,
and also
the Rolling Thunders for the Union are, they're your, I guess you'd call them your mid-range tanks. That in other you'd kind of be more generic. I don't want to say generic, but that kind of thing that you'd see more of.
And they look so good.
They look really nice.
There are all these little kind of thematic things in the Union miniatures that I've noticed. Like, there's definitely a train kind of vibe to a lot of the stuff. You'll be sort of cow catcher kind of things in the front and all this. So the Union are going to feel quite different, I think, to either of the other two factions in the way they play.
And that's been a really fun game design challenge, because we're taking kind of narrative things that were in Dystopian Wars or in Wild West Exodus and going, okay, so how does that translate? So, like, taking the Galahads from the Crown, they're these kind of, because the Crown are a slightly antiquated, more traditional battle force. They used to control most of the world. There was the Pax Britannia.
They've not really moved on.
They haven't really moved on. So there's still these big, slow, heavy, kind of chunky tanks, whereas the Union is a relatively new power. So there's a lot of mass production and, like, well, we're just going to get things out and kind of, they're going to be all right, but there's plenty of them because they're mass producing them. And then that you're like, okay, well, how can we represent that on the table with miniatures, with rules and everything else? So that's been really fun.
I love the idea also of seeing the Union writ large across the table.
Oh, yeah.
Because obviously when you see them in Wild West Exodus, there's little posses and the like. It's nice seeing a few of the blue troopers running around, the little blue bellies. But
now you can zoom out, right? And
actually seeing the 7th Cavalry coming forward on their iron horses will be an amazing sight. Seeing that field of blue and getting the real spectacle of a Union force as it should be, chunking towards people and going, we're only making this stuff now, so we're making it at the cutting edge of the current technology. It's not the last iteration.
And speaking of cutting edge technology, see that segue there?
It's good.
Following up the Union, we've got the Enlightened.
Makes sense.
For those that aren't aware, they are the future. They are up in Antarctica doing all sorts of crazy science. And their miniatures in Armoured Clash are going to be just bonkers.
I mean, they don't have tanks. They have walkers, but 3-legged walkers, one might say.
Right.
I mean,
interesting. There's probably a term for that.
Possibly, yeah. There's a theme song playing in my head right now. I can't remember what it is.
3-foot thing. I think
some form of like a bipod with more legs.
Yeah. And they will look
stabilized bipod. That's what we're
lucky enough to see them in the studio, and
they are looking really cool.
Gorgeous.
And not just them, the big one.
Oh yeah,
the stompiest, biggest, big multi-legged robot you can imagine. Quadpod. There we go. So we've got bipods and quadpods. We'll think what the one
not
between
sure
those
the middle
is.
One is. Yeah.
But yeah, the Enlightened are going to be a real fun change again, because they're going to have this that kind of proper B-movie sci-fi edge, as they should.
Yeah, they are the closest to sci-fi in a steampunk style game, and they've always been that borderline high tech that everybody else aspires to.
Exactly.
So much so that they'll go out and steal their ships if they're not. Just never leave your ships unattended.
No.
Silly Enlightened.
Yeah, so we've been looking at some of the stuff the Enlightened have got coming, and it's looking really nice.
Yeah, and again, people have played Wild West Exodus. You've got your constructs and your menials, and your people who are perhaps locked into vehicles and stuff like that, who are maybe they've had so much work done that they're not quite as human as they used to be, and so that is going to
find the next stage in evolution.
Yeah, there you
go.
They've
got a job for life. Let's put it that way.
They've got a job for life, whether they like it or not. And again, that kind of leads into game design. And like, what does that mean? And well, people who will have played Armoured Clash know about suppression, so maybe that will affect the Enlightened differently. They're weird and wonderful high-tech weapons that have got beams and things like that. maybe you'll operate your army differently to another faction, and that's been really at the forefront of our minds, kind of trying to make sure that each faction feels like its own thing, not just miniatures, but with actual gameplay.
Sure.
I think any kind of, when you're doing like faction design work for a war game, you always want to kind of pull them apart a bit, you know. So it's not just a +1, -1. Yeah. Give them some actual characterful stuff to really chunk into. And I think, we're going to hit that with the Enlightened, definitely.
Yeah. Reduce, recycle, reuse.
Exactly.
They are my watchwords for the Enlightened.
So that's like the end of this year.
And again, actually, with the Enlightened, you'll see things that you've seen in Wild West Exodus. So the scythes, the sickles, the little flyers.
Oh yes.
And the little walkers, the cavalry walkers, monocavs, things like that. You'll see those.
They're kind of I'd say they work best at this scale. The sense of speed and movement, you get that so much nicer on a zoomed out thing where you can really see them traversing big distances, especially the sickles. I mean, they're going to be great fun.
Fantastic stuff.
So
that's winter time.
Yeah.
What about further out?
So spring next year, the trees are in bloom. There are bunnies hopping around.
Yeah.
And look, it's the Imperium.
Yes.
But what do you think? What's the Imperium going to look like? What sort of things can we tell people?
I mean, if people have seen the Armoured Clash rulebook, which hopefully they have, then there are some images in there that people will recognise as being Imperium and go, but I haven't seen what they are yet.
Sneaky little peeks in that book.
Big chunky walkers,
the
two-legged
Imperium
walkers
walker is
really nice.
The best.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think Chris showed us some Teutonic Knights.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, you got your knights and your squires as a kind of a mixed unit kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that we're again playing around with the idea of who are they? What is their identity? How do you bring that kind of crusading knightly thing to the battlefield at this scale? So watch this space.
Voltaic weapons that you see in Dystopian Wars, they have a smaller version of that. So again, we're representing those. So if you like electrocuting people with your toy soldiers, Who doesn't, right? Exactly.
I think it's one of those interesting things where like some things in Dystopian Wars you won't see them translate across. No. So for example, the crown. We don't have the same sort of shield generator tech being used in the same way at Armoured Clash scale because they'd be huge. Whereas actually some of the things like, this sort of weaponry, and we'll talk maybe more about that in a little bit, but certainly you can see the kinds of technology they're using and how that then carries over.
Across,
So alongside the Imperium, sorry, go on. Have you got another one?
I was just going to say, whereas the Enlightened is clearly much more of a fantastical faction, if you like. The Imperium are kind of more loosely based on real world things. So some of those images, again, that you'll see in Armoured Clash are like, that's clearly real world redesigns that we've kind of taken and kind of tweaked a little bit. So if you're more kind of leaning towards slightly more that historical vibe, that kind of weird war thing, you might like the Imperium.
There's a lot of this historical precedent. We've got people in the team who are very into their military history and can give you all sorts of facts and figures. And a lot of the stuff that we see is some of the units. There are units which are, for example, based off like rejected designs in the real world or things that almost made it out into the real world but didn't quite. And I love that almost like it's just a little alternate thing. This actually happened and this thing did make it to production rather than this other thing. And so we're giving things a chance maybe didn't get a chance in the real world.
The Fangan tank, I think, is a prime example of that for the Empire, which is like this ball tank with the tracks that go around it. And it's like they tried to make stuff like that and it didn't work. But of course, in an alternate history, you can just say, we've got
and whatever else,
and gyroscopes, and we could,
it will all work all the time.
Absolutely,
science wizards did it.
Yeah, it's fine. Stick some pickle helms on the Imperium and send them off.
Exactly. So alongside the Imperium, spring next year, we've also got a campaign book.
Yes, indeed,
coming out.
We can't talk too much about that, but we want to make sure people know that the idea of kind of long-term play and campaigns, and because a lot of people, yes, you can just rock up with your game, play it with your buddies, but they still want to have that long-term interaction and kind of like see how the world's progressing, see how all the factions are kind of moving on in their own way. So that will be coming.
And it's not just Armoured Clash.
I was about to ask. Because I mean, when you're sitting with a game that nestles between two other systems, it would seem churlish at the very least not to include everybody in all the fun.
So I believe this will be an Armoured Clash / Dystopian Wars. It will be a product for those two games. And I mean, they might sneak in a few little surprises for Wild West Exodus as well, but certainly the plan is to kind of start bridging those gaps a little bit and have ways to bridge the narrative, you know?
Can you land your army before Elder Fleet gets sunk?
Yeah. Exactly. And then the next scenario, you know, from that follows on. Actually, there'll be some, you know, interesting things which happen as a result. And so, so that'll be happening in spring. So then imagine the sun has gone higher, everything's in full bloom. We're into summer 2025. How's it 2025 next year? Let's not think too hard about that.
So clear skies.
Clear skies
with aircraft flying through them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's a huge part of the core of the game. You know, in all new games, you're trying to make sure that everything comes out and it gets its like time in the sun, and this will be the time of the aircraft. And there are plenty of rules in the rulebook for using aircraft and intercepting strafing runs, things like that. But we'll be seeing them get some love, get some miniatures.
I think the way to think of aircraft in Armoured Clash is they operate very differently to anything else. And I'd say the best kind of analogy is for maybe some of the more old school players out there who have been around the wargame scene for a while. When Warhammer Battle Magic came out, you got the idea of like, you know, magic was always a thing in Warhammer. But when Battle Magic came out, it was like, oh no, actually this is really focuses on a different bit of the game, which acts a bit differently to what you already know and really shakes things up. So you've already got in the game, you've got some units that have aerial attacks and can target aerial units. You've got things like the Spitfire Rocketeers who can go aerial for a short period of time, but aircraft are a whole different thing. And the main thing that makes aircraft different is they live off the board, they live in reserve, and they kind of zip in for attack runs and everyone opportunity fires at them and you get the whole strafing, you know, batteries in the air and things. And then they fly off and that's kind of as much as there is in the rulebook. When the aircraft release comes out, we're bringing those models out and there might be a few extra little things to make them do more things like, as you say, intercepting things or doing particular missions as they're flying in. Exactly.
We all want dogfighting.
We do. To clarify, we mean aircraft. I had a whole discussion with some game designers about, a dogfighting game. Like, what? Elevation terrible. Really matters. Why?
Well, I mean, a Chihuahua without elevation
exactly.
is not going to get anywhere.
Exactly. So aircraft will be happening, and it's going to be lovely because I love when you get a war game that kind of hits its stride, and people get a feel for, this is the way you play. This is the way you play well. This is how you build the correct force, as is always the conventional wisdom. And you throw something, and it's like, now everything changes. Yeah. And suddenly people need to start thinking about dedicated anti-air units and all of that. So that's going to be huge.
All of a sudden, my massive empire blocks of troops are just a really big target. A really big, slow-moving target for aircraft.
Yep. And so then while you're focusing your eye on the sky, there's a rumbling below the ground as well.
Indeed.
Because the Commonwealth are coming.
Yeah.
And there's a great picture in the rulebook of one of their tunneling machines coming up from underneath and wrecking a Union tank column. Yeah. And that's going to be a lot of what we see on the battlefield, I think, because they're going to get, and then like the Imperium, the Commonwealth, the Union, Enlightened, they're all going to have the similar sort of release that we've seen with the Crown and the Empire, I think. So we've got a couple of different designs of sprue, like a light one and a heavy one, some kind of big, heavy something.
Yeah. You'll have they might not be called main battle tanks. They might operate slightly differently, but they'll be your heavy armored units. Yeah. You'll have your infantry, your artillery, even if they're, operate
and
slightly
of course,
differently.
We'll be very careful. One of the mistakes we're definitely not falling into is not everyone gets everything. Like, I think a lot of people go, well, where's my heavy artillery unit for my faction? Well, you don't get one. That's not the way you play. Yeah. And so we're making sure that everyone has a different mix of things. Yeah. So they all feel different. So the Commonwealth will be coming out summer next year. I
mean, again, as people have seen things released for Wild Exodus, there was Jadzia Kosciuszko, if I'm saying that right, on a tread bike. Yes. So I would imagine we'll probably see tread bikes as an awesome cavalry charge.
I think
cryo lances and things like that.
Big old block of them, Get them out there. Yeah. So maybe the leaves are falling from the trees and we're into the autumn. And maybe it's been nearly a year since the game's been out. And how do you celebrate a year? What about a double faction release? How about bringing out the Alliance first?
The Alliance,
and then the Sultanate. So they're both, again, at that point we're rounding out. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'll only have, will that be all of them, in fact?
That will be all of them.
That'll be all of them. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, of course it will. Yes, that'll be the full 8. And of course, that's plastics at that point. But who knows? We might squeeze in some little surprise releases here and there, extra bits and pieces. But I imagine I think the Alliance, we can probably say a few things about how they might work.
I mean,
A couple of little teeny weeny things.
Foreign Legion with heat rifles.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, you know those tanks you love so much? Guess what?
Yeah. And actually, I mean, narratively, the Alliance.
Surely you jest.
The Alliance, even in the name, they're a collection of different
of the
factions.
Latin nations.
Yeah.
Because they're not just European as well.
No,
there's the
absolutely.
big group of them in South America.
Yeah. There's Susa. There's your kind of Europe as well, and they're each kind of bringing their own things, and kind of in theory they should operate like a. Hey, I've got this bit over here, and I've got this bit over here that does a different thing, and I've got this bit over here that does a different thing.
Like different cells,
and
almost.
and you're trying to make sure they all cover each other and work together well, like an alliance.
Like an alliance.
Yeah.
And of course, if you wanted to, as a player, you could totally kind of lean one way or lean another way. If you want to have massed kind of, I want to say conscripts, but people who are maybe less elite fighting troops, then maybe you want to lean towards Susa. If you want to go more elite, then those foreign legions will tickle you behind the ear just there.
Yeah. And then after that, I suppose all that's left is to start thinking with portals.
Talk
about the Sultanate, because, I mean, we've seen what they do in Dystopian Wars.
Yeah.
And
Filth is what they do in Dystopian Wars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
lovable filth.
Why not bring a little bit of that onto land as well?
Yeah.
So I think you'll be seeing a lot of basically the stuff you'd expect to see based on the way they play in Dystopian Wars. I think they'll be one of the ones that kind of mirrors that quite closely on the Armoured Clash battlefield.
That'll be a really interesting one for me personally to take a look at, because I envisage them as playing like a death from 1,000 cuts. Very quick, constantly attacking from directions you're not expecting. Not one devastating punch, not one big fortification style.
If you can pin them down,
forward.
You're all right, but good luck pinning them down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that is pretty much nailed on for them. Yeah. Because it's similar to how they play in Dystopian Wars, but also it's very evocative of the Sultanate as a faction, as a nation. Nations there.
So I mean that's a year's
also,
worth.
You've got to remember that the Sultanate have the allies in the Order.
Yes.
The Order was represented in Exodus with the Spiker and the Corcaroli, the big like metal clad warriors. So seeing those at 10 mil scale against normal humans. So again, even though you're going to be doing that death of 1,000 cuts, you'll still have options to have heavy infantry who can
that big right hook just in case.
Yeah, just in case. Bop.
I'm loving your work so far. Can't wait to see where it goes. So don't despair if you don't happen to be one of the initial factions. Your stuff is coming.
Yeah.
Hopefully this has whet your appetite and gives you a chance to get in and play around with Armoured Clash between now and the subsequent releases. And obviously keep an eye out for that campaign. That sounds like it's going to be an amazing amount of fun. Yeah. Until next time, bye-bye.
It's Armoured Clash week, and we have 3 amazing starter sets to be won. We'll pick 3 winners, one from the YouTube comments, one from the OnTableTop.com comments, and one from the Cultic Games members, so you guys get an extra chance to win.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now, and while you're at it, why not hit subscribe, and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it, go on.